I heard the news the way people hear the end of a song they didn't know was playing. Quietly, halfway through. And far too late to change anything. It was Sunday morning. That colorless kind of morning when light falls flat across the kitchen table, and the house smells faintly of yesterday's tea. I was sitting there with my cup, the one with the chipped rim my husband used to tease me about. It's lucky, I'd tell him. Things that survive a crack deserve to stay. The phone rang, a small metallic sound that sliced through the stillness. I almost didn't answer. At 71, silence has become a loyal friend. One of the few that never asks for anything in return. But habit one, I picked it up. Renate? It was her voice. Too bright, too polite. The kind of brightness that hides something sharp behind it. Yes. Hello, dear, I said, steadying my tone. When's the wedding? I was just telling Mrs. Dvorak that it must be soon. A pause. Then a laugh, brittle as glass. Oh, actually, we got married yesterday. Yesterday. I remember that word as clearly as the sound of my teacup cracking when it hit the sink. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. The brain, when it's been trained for decades to expect disappointment quietly, often corrects what it doesn't want to believe. But she repeated it, slower this time, as if explaining something simple to a child. Yes, just a small ceremony, nothing fancy. We didn't want to trouble anyone. Trouble anyone? I paid their rent for 3 years, bought their car, covered his student loans when the bank refused. But apparently, being at their wedding would have been trouble. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of all the birthdays, Christmases, and tired Sunday calls where I pretended I didn't notice the distance growing. I felt my hand tremble slightly. I set the phone down before it could betray me. Sometimes it's not the cruelty that breaks you. It's the politeness around it. I sat there for a long time after she hung up. The kitchen clock ticked, steady as judgment. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice, then stopped. I stared at the dent in the wooden table where Carl, my late husband, once dropped his keys. For a moment I could almost hear him. Let it go, Renate. They'll learn. But this didn't feel like something to let go. It felt like standing at the edge of a life I no longer recognized. And maybe that's what aging really is. Not losing strength, but losing the illusions that once made disappointment bearable. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. The outline of a woman I half remembered. When did I start apologizing for taking up space in my own life? I don't know how long I sat there before the tears came. They weren't loud. Just quiet, efficient things, like rain that's been waiting all season to fall. Later that day, I went to the drawer where I keep old letters and bank slips. Proofs of love, I suppose. Receipts of motherhood. There they were. Every transfer, every check with his name on it. Each one signed in my careful, trusting hand. I didn't keep them for evidence. I kept them the way a mother keeps her child's baby shoes. A record of faith. But now they looked like something else entirely. Not love. Not care, just payment. I don't think my son ever meant to hurt me. Not deliberately. He's always been soft-spoken, easily led. The kind of man who confuses kindness with weakness. Mostly because I taught him that. When his father died, I told him that love means giving without keeping count, but I never said what happens when the giving never stops. I folded the papers back neatly, as if putting them in order might somehow put the past in order too. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house made its small, familiar sounds. The old pipes breathing, the wood expanding with the cold. Every sound reminded me of presence, and yet I had never felt so absent from my own life. At around 2 a.m, I got up and made tea. The window over the sink was fogged. The kind of soft blur that hides what you're not ready to see. Somewhere in that fog I thought of my son's wedding. The photographs they must have taken. The cake I wasn't there to cut. The vows I wasn't meant to hear. And then, without warning, I thought of my husband again. The night before he died, he'd squeezed my hand and said, "Promise me you'll live with pride, not guilt." I nodded then, thinking pride was something young people wore like perfume. I didn't know it could be something you fight for at 71. By morning I knew what I had to do. Not out of anger, but clarity. I made a list. Not of groceries or bills, but of things I would stop doing. No more transfers. No more small loans. No more pretending I didn't notice when she called him my provider. And no more apologizing for finally saying no. The pen felt heavy in my hand, but the words came light. For the first time in years, I wasn't writing as someone's mother. I was writing as myself. I folded the paper, placed it in the drawer, and whispered, to the empty room. To my husband's ghost. To the universe, maybe. It ends here. It was only later I'd learned that endings, especially the honest ones, never go quietly. The next morning arrived dressed in politeness, the kind that tries to cover the scent of something spoiled. The phone rang again. I stared at it for a full minute before answering. When I finally did, my voice came out calm, almost serene. "Hello, Mom, it's me." Just hearing his voice brought a strange ache. Not quite love, not quite grief. Something in between. "Congratulations," I said. "I hear there was a wedding." He hesitated. I could almost hear the machinery of guilt turning. "Yeah, it was really small. We didn't want to make a big deal. You know how Emily doesn't like attention." Emily, my daughter-in-law. The name itself felt like glass against my tongue. "I see," I replied. "Well, I hope it was everything you wanted." Another pause. Then that same tone he always used when he was a boy caught doing something wrong. Soft, coaxing, seeking forgiveness before even asking for it. "Mom, don't be upset. We just thought it'd be simpler this way. Less stress for everyone." Simpler. It's a word people use when they mean without you. I didn't argue. I just listened to his voice, the way mothers do, searching for something real beneath the performance. But all I heard was fear, not of me but of losing comfort. He talked for a few minutes, about the new apartment, her job, their plans. Then almost casually he said, "Oh, by the way, the rent's gone up again. Could you—" "No." It came out sharper than I intended. He stopped. "No?" he repeated. "No." I said again, softer this time, almost like a prayer. "You're married now. You'll manage." There was silence, the kind that doesn't just sit between people but builds walls. Then he sighed, half offended, half disbelieving. "Okay, I mean, if that's how you feel." "That's exactly how I feel." When the call ended, I felt both light and sick. Freedom always begins with nausea. A few days later, a letter arrived. Not handwritten, printed, sterile, polite, from them. An invitation, they called it, to celebrate our marriage informally at their apartment next week. It was signed Love, Emily and Daniel. I almost laughed. It wasn't love that sent it. It was damage control. Still I went. Old habits die slower than old women. Their apartment was everything I had paid for. Literally. My money in the leather couch. My savings in the refrigerator. My late husband's pension in the polished floorboards. Emily opened the door wearing a silk robe that looked expensive in the way guilt usually does. Her smile was precise, perfectly measured warmth. "Renate, I'm so glad you came." I nodded, offering the flowers I'd bought, cheap ones, intentionally. "Congratulations." She took them with that smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Come in, please." Daniel came out of the kitchen, awkward and boyish as ever. "Mom, hey, you look great, do I?" I wanted to ask. Or do I just look like someone who still believes you'll turn around one day and see me? We sat. They poured wine. They talked. About furniture, travel plans, promotions. Like actors reciting a script written by someone else. Every sentence began with we. None with I. After a while, Emily leaned back and said lightly, "We've been thinking of buying a small house. Something just outside the city." Daniel nodded eagerly. "Yeah, maybe with a garden. We were wondering if you could help with the down payment." I looked at them both. Their faces were open, expectant. As if generosity were an inheritance and I was the last keeper of it. I smiled. "No." Emily blanked, almost amused. "I'm sorry?" I said no. "I think I've given enough." Her eyes narrowed, just slightly. The smile freezing for a heartbeat before she recovered. "Of course, Renate, we didn't mean to assume," but I saw the flicker, the small controlled flame of insult behind her perfect expression. I'd lit it, and it scared her. The rest of the evening was short. They talked, I listened, and the air between us grew thicker with every polite word. When I left, Daniel kissed my cheek. His lips were cold. Outside, the night air felt heavier than it should. But under that weight, I sensed something small and alive, the first pulse of my own will returning. A week later, the first message came. "Hi, Mom. Emily's been feeling hurt about dinner. She says you were cold. Maybe you could apologize." Apologize. The word made me laugh out loud. A short, startled sound that startled even me. I didn't reply. 2 days later, another message. "We need to talk about some financial misunderstandings." Then, an email. From Emily, lengthy, articulate, manipulative. Words like concerned, stability, and responsibility scattered through it like polite landmines. By the end of that week, I understood something chilling. When you stop being useful to people who depend on your silence, they don't disappear. They reorganize. The real war began quietly. Subtle rumors, whispers at the church, friends telling me gently that Emily had mentioned I was struggling mentally since Carl's death. That maybe I needed help. Help. Such a merciful word for theft. I remember standing in front of the mirror one morning, brushing my hair, when I saw it. That look of disbelief in my own eyes. As if I couldn't decide whether to cry or applaud their audacity. But instead, I smiled. Because somewhere deep down, something stronger than fear had begun to wake. You see, when people think you're weak, you can move like a ghost. You can plan, you can prepare, and you can fight. Not for revenge, but for the quiet, stubborn dignity that no one can sign away. And that's exactly what I intended to do. I began keeping a notebook. It wasn't a conscious decision at first. Just a small spiral-bound one. I found in the kitchen drawer, wedged between old recipes and unpaid bills. I wrote the date on the first page, then a single line. "They are trying to erase me." The word startled me. They look too dramatic, too final. But the truth has a way of looking dramatic when you've spent years pretending everything is fine. I started writing small things. What they said. How they said it. What time the calls came. The tone in their messages. It felt foolish at first, like I was making a case against shadows. But every time I looked back at those pages, I saw the pattern forming. The way kindness had turned into control, and control into quiet cruelty. A few days later, I went to see Clara, an old friend from my teaching days. We hadn't spoken in years, but she was the kind of woman who always kept a chair ready for the past. When I arrived, her living room smelled like lemon polish and old wood. She poured coffee into china cups, the real kind, with matching saucers. "You've lost weight," she said. I smiled faintly. "You notice everything. I notice pain, she said softly. And you're wearing it. I told her everything. Not all at once, but in pieces. The way people confess when they're afraid of hearing their own story out loud. The secret wedding, the lies, the slow campaign to make me seem unstable. She listened without interrupting, except once, when she reached across the table and took my hand. You're not crazy, Renat. You're just finally saying no. That sentence settled in my chest like a seed. When I returned home, there was an envelope under my door. It was from Emily's lawyer, polite language, legal terms, words like joint property, guardianship concerns, financial mismanagement. It suggested, so carefully it almost sounded like compassion, that my mental faculties might be deteriorating, and that for my own protection, Daniel and Emily wished to take over managing my assets, my life. For the first time in decades, I laughed. Truly laughed. It wasn't madness. It was relief. The kind of laughter that comes when someone finally says the quiet part out loud. They weren't just ungrateful. They were predators. Polite, educated, articulate predators who had mistaken my grief for blindness. I called their lawyer myself. Tell your clients, I said, that I've been underestimated for 71 years. I won't make that mistake again. Then I hung up. That night, I took out Carl's old box, the one he kept under the bed, filled with old insurance forms, pension details, deeds and savings bonds. I had never opened it after his death. It felt sacred somehow, like touching a ghost's belongings, but now it felt necessary. I laid everything out on the table piece by piece. The papers smelled faintly of cedar and dust. His handwriting was still there. Neat, deliberate, confident. It struck me then how much he had trusted me to carry on wisely, and how far I had drifted from that strength. As I sorted through the documents, I began making copies, digital ones too. Clara's son worked in law. She'd already promised to help. For the first time in months, I felt like I was building something again. Not a house, not a family, but a boundary. Every woman should have one, even if she builds it alone. The next few weeks were a blur of phone calls, appointments, and long evenings spent rereading the past. Every check I'd written, every deposit, every lie disguised as gratitude. My son stopped calling. Emily didn't message again, but I could feel them circling, waiting for me to bend first. And then came the visit. It was early afternoon when I heard the knock. 3 light taps. I opened the door to find Daniel standing there, hands in pockets, wearing that same boyish expression I once found impossible to resist. "Can we talk?" he asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. He walked in slowly, looking around the house like it was a museum of forgotten kindness. "Mom," he started, "this has gotten out of hand. We're worried about you. Emily says you've been writing things down, calling lawyers. That's not like you." I studied his face. "Not like me, or not like the version of me that didn't question you." He sighed. "I just want to help." I smiled sadly. "You've been helping yourself for years, Daniel." His expression faltered, a flicker of guilt, quickly buried. "It's not like that. We just want you safe. What if something happens to you?" "I'll manage," I said quietly. "The same way I managed after your father died, with no one but myself." The silence stretched between us. Then he tried one last thing, the thing manipulators always use when logic fails. "Mom, we love you." I nodded slowly. "Then show it by leaving me alone." He stood there for a moment, his eyes searching mine, as if looking for the woman who once would have broken at those words. But she was gone. When he left, I felt something deep inside me unclench. A muscle I didn't know I'd been holding for years. That night, I lit a candle by Carl's photo. The flame was small but steady. I spoke to him softly. They think they can take what we built, but they forget who taught me to stand. For a long while, I just sat there in the glow, feeling both exhausted and awake. The house felt different, not larger, but freer. And somewhere inside I heard my younger self whisper, "You're not fighting them. You're remembering you exist." A few days later, a letter arrived from my own lawyer. He'd reviewed everything and was filing a formal protection order against interference. "You've got a strong case, Mrs. Richter," he said over the phone. "They can't declare you incompetent without proof. And judging by your notes, you're more competent than half the people I know." I thanked him, but what I really wanted to say was, it's not about competence. It's about respect. Because after 71 years of being polite, I was finally learning the language of power. And it sounded like silence. The kind that doesn't explain itself anymore. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Not peaceful. Just quiet. In that heavy way silence can be when it's filled with unfinished sentences. I found myself talking to the wall sometimes, or to Carl's photograph, or to the plants on the windowsill that leaned toward the morning light like old souls trying to remember warmth. It's strange how a house changes when you stop waiting for footsteps. The rooms don't echo anymore. They breathe. At first, I kept expecting the phone to ring. Some part of me, that ancient maternal instinct that survives every betrayal, believed Daniel would call, apologize, say he'd been wrong. But days became weeks, and the only sound was the clock ticking over my small kitchen table. Tick, tick, tick. It wasn't time passing. It was memory hardening. I began walking again, early mornings, through the park near my house. The air in spring carries a kind of forgiveness that words can't match. The lilacs were just starting to bloom, soft, shy purple. I used to walk there with Daniel when he was small. He'd collect pebbles and tell me each one was a planet. I still remember how he'd hand them to me, proud and breathless, saying, "This one's Earth. Mama, it has water." Back then, I thought motherhood was about giving everything. Now I understand it's about teaching them when to stop taking. On the 5th morning, I sat on a bench near the pond, feeding crumbs to the ducks. An old man sat beside me, newspaper trembling slightly in his hand. He nodded. "Beautiful morning." "Yes," I said. "And quiet," he chuckled. "At our age, quiet's a blessing." I smiled, but inside I thought, not when it's forced on you. That evening Clara called. "You sound stronger," she said. "I feel empty," I admitted. "Good," she replied. "That's where healing starts. Emptiness isn't absence, Renat. It's space. You finally have space." Her words stayed with me long after the call ended. Space. I looked around the living room. The chair where Carl used to read. The blanket Daniel wrapped himself in when he had the flu. The photo of all three of us smiling at some long-forgotten picnic. The woman in that photo looked younger, yes, but also smaller somehow. As if she'd been folded to fit inside the lives of others. I didn't want to be her anymore. So, I began smally cooked meals for one and enjoyed them. I rearranged the furniture. I threw out the old calendar still pinned to the wall, the one where every date had someone else's appointment written on it. And one afternoon, almost without thinking, I went into the bedroom closet and pulled down a box I hadn't touched in years. My paints. The lids were stiff, the brushes brittle, but the colors were still there. Blues, ochres, greens that smelled faintly of turpentine and memory. I set up a small easel by the window and began to paint. Not landscapes, not faces, just movement. Color where pain used to be, light where guilt once lived. Hours passed like minutes. For the first time in months I didn't think of them. But peace has a way of testing you. One morning, a knock at the door. Hard. impatient. I opened it to find a man I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Richter?" he asked. "I'm from Adult Protective Services. We've received a concern regarding your well-being." The words hit like a sudden gust. "A concern?" I stepped aside. "Of course. Come in." He looked around, clipboard in hand. "We received reports that you may be showing signs of confusion. That you've been paranoid. Are you currently receiving help managing your finances?" I almost laughed. "No. But I could recommend a few people who need help managing mine." He didn't smile. I made tea, out of habit, and answered every question calmly. I showed him my accounts, my legal correspondence, my notes. By the end, he looked embarrassed. "Everything seems perfectly in order, Mrs. Richter. I'm sorry for the intrusion." "It's not your fault," I said gently. "It's theirs." After he left, I closed the door and stood there for a long moment, hand on the wood, feeling the tremor of anger rise and fade. They weren't just trying to steal from me anymore. They were trying to rewrite me. That night, I wrote another line in my notebook. They mistook love for permission. It felt like a confession and a vow at once. I sent copies of every letter and bank record to my lawyer. I even scanned the handwritten notes my husband had left before his death, stating his assets were solely in my name. My lawyer called it bulletproof documentation. But what I felt wasn't triumph. It was sadness. The deep kind that comes when you realize some battles are fought not to win, but to prove you're still alive. One afternoon, while cleaning, I found a small photo tucked inside an old cookbook. Daniel at 12, his arm around me, both of us laughing. The sight of it cracked something open. I sat down on the kitchen floor and cried. Not for what I'd lost, but for everything I'd excused in the name of love. The truth is, I still love him. Even now, love doesn't vanish when betrayed. It just changes its shape, becomes quieter, sadder, wiser. After a while, I wiped my tears and placed the photo back inside the book. Not as a secret, but as a lesson. Maybe motherhood never really ends. It just learns new boundaries. The next week, my lawyer called with news. "They have backed off and for now," he said. "The agency report cleared you completely. I think they underestimated you." I smiled. Most people do. That evening I painted again, this time a single flame against a dark background. I titled it Resilience, and as the brush moved, I realized something. I wasn't waiting for anyone's apology anymore. Sometimes, the quietest revenge is peace. I knew the calm wouldn't last. Peace, I've learned, is not the absence of conflict. It's the space before the next betrayal tries to find its way in. It came one Friday afternoon. The sun was already low, spreading a thin gold across the kitchen tiles when the doorbell rang. I recognized the shadow on the frosted glass immediately. The slope of my son's shoulders, the stiffness in his posture. And behind him, the faint outline of her, Emily. For a moment I just stood there, watching their shapes through the door. Blurred, almost ghost-like. Then I opened it. "Mom," Daniel said, forcing a smile. "Can we come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. "If you're here to talk, yes. If you're here to lie, no." He blinked, caught off guard, then laughed awkwardly. "It's not like that." Emily brushed past him with that quiet confidence that always felt like a performance. "Renate, we just wanted to clear the air. Things have gotten complicated." "Complicated is one word," I said, closing the door. "Cruel is another." She sighed, the way people sigh when they believe themselves superior. "You've misunderstood us." I gestured toward the table. "Then by all means make me understand." They sat. The same table where I'd once served them soup. The same room where laughter used to echo. Now it felt like a courtroom. and I was both witness and judge. Daniel started talking. Carefully rehearsed sentences about family unity, forgiveness, miscommunication. Each word polished, hollow. Emily filled the spaces between with her own sweetness, like frosting on poison. Finally, I interrupted. You tried to have me declared unfit. Emily's expression didn't flinch. We were worried. You've been unstable, writing strange things, contacting lawyers. I contacted a lawyer because you sent yours, I said quietly. You tried to take my home, my accounts, my life. And you did it behind words like concern and love. Daniel's eyes dropped. His silence was more painful than anything she could have said. I looked at him, my son. The boy who once clung to my skirt at the supermarket, who once cried because I forgot to pack his favorite sandwich. And I asked softly, when did I stop being your mother and start being your target? He didn't answer. Emily leaned forward. Renate, we're all family here. Let's not make this dramatic. We just think it's best if you let us handle things from now on. You're alone, Alon. It's easy to get confused. I smiled, but it wasn't kind. Emily, I've lived 71 years without needing permission to breathe. I won't start now. Her mask slipped, just for a second. The muscles around her eyes tightened. You're being emotional. Good, I said. It means I'm still alive. She stood, smoothing her dress. We were only trying to help. You'll regret this stubbornness one day. Maybe, I said, standing too. But I'd rather regret standing alone than live owned by gratitude. Daniel looked up, his face pale. Mom, no, I said gently. Let her speak for both of you. She's been doing it for years. Emily opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, she had no script. The silence that followed was heavy, like something sacred. And in that silence, I realized what real power feels like. Not control, not revenge, but clarity. I wasn't angry anymore. Just done. Please leave, I said quietly. This house no longer belongs to the version of me who tolerated cruelty disguised as care. Daniel hesitated. His eyes filled with tears he refused to shed. You're my mother, he whispered. I was, I said. And I always will be. But you'll have to meet me again as a man, not as a child who takes. He nodded weakly, then turned toward the door. Emily followed, her heels clicking like punctuation marks on the end of a long, exhausting sentence. When the door shut behind them, I felt something in the air shift. The kind of silence that's not empty, but earned. That night I sat by the window, the same cup of tea cooling beside me. Outside, the streetlights flickered in a soft amber rhythm. I thought of Carl again, of the way he used to say, dignity is love turned inward. For years I thought dignity meant distance. Now I knew better. It means remembering that your kindness was never a weakness, even when others mistook it for one. I opened my notebook and wrote. Today I spoke without shaking. It was the simplest sentence I'd ever written, but it felt like victory. The next morning, I found an envelope under the door. No return address, just my name in Daniel's handwriting. Inside, a single folded page. Mom, I'm sorry. I don't know how things became this way. I let her talk me into things I never should have. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do want you to know. I remember who you are. Love, Daniel. I read it 3 times. The ink was smudged in places, maybe from his hand, maybe from tears. I didn't cry. I just placed it beside my notebook, between the lines of evidence and confession. Life is never simple enough for villains and heroes. We're all just people trying not to drown in our own needs. That afternoon, I walked to the park again. The ducks were still there, the lilacs fuller now. A little girl was running in circles near the pond, her laughter echoing across the water. Her mother called out to her gently, patient but firm. It reminded me of something, a version of myself I'd almost forgotten. I smiled. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't anyone's provider, anyone's problem, or anyone's savior. I was just Renate Richter, a woman sitting in the sun, breathing freely. And maybe that's all liberation really is. Remembering your own name and saying it without apology. I kept Daniel's letter on the table for 3 days before touching it again. Not because I was angry, but because silence, I've learned, can sometimes heal more deeply than forgiveness ever could. During those 3 days, I cleaned the house, not out of habit but ceremony. Every drawer I emptied felt like closing a wound. Every old photo I placed in a box was a whisper to the past. Thank you, but you can rest now. On the 4th morning, I woke before sunrise. The light came slow, gentle, deliberate, painting the edges of my room gold. For the first time in years, I felt no fear of the day ahead. No need to rehearse my thoughts. No anxiety waiting behind the walls. I made tea. I sat by the window, and I opened my notebook to a fresh page. The story always begins again. That's what I wrote. Later that day, I walked to the post office with a single envelope, addressed to Daniel. Inside, I had placed only one thing: a photograph. It was taken decades ago. Him at 8 years old, holding a kite, sunlight on his face, and me kneeling beside him laughing. On the back, I wrote, "You once knew joy before you knew fear. Find him again." No lectures, no forgiveness, just truth. That evening, rain arrived. The kind that doesn't storm, but whispers. The air smelled like lilacs and earth. I stood outside on the porch, letting the drops touch my hands, my face. For years I had watched the world through windows. Now I wanted to feel it again. Somewhere in that soft rain I thought of Emily too. Not with hatred, but with a strange, tired compassion. She wasn't born cruel. She was born afraid. Afraid to be small, to be unloved, to lose control. I could understand that now. Fear, after all, is the only inheritance that never skips a generation. That night, I dreamed of Carl. He was standing by the lake we used to visit, his shoes in his hands, his feet in the water. He smiled at me, that calm, knowing smile that used to drive me mad and comfort me at once. "You did well," he said. When I woke, the morning light was already spilling across the room. The storm had passed. In the days that followed, life returned in small, quiet ways. I planted herbs on the balcony. I joined a reading group at the library. I began volunteering at a nearby shelter, not because I wanted to save anyone, but because I wanted to belong without condition. Sometimes when I walk through the park, I see young mothers with their children, impatient, exhausted, loving. I smile at them, not with envy, not with regret, but with understanding. Because I know now, motherhood isn't something you lose when your children grow. It just changes shape. It becomes the way you hold yourself, the way you speak gently to your own reflection, the way you keep choosing life even when no one's watching. A few weeks later, a small package arrived in the mail. Inside was a single item, a wooden frame. Inside it, the photo I'd sent to Daniel. But beneath it, another note in his handwriting. "I remember him, Mom. Thank you for reminding me." No apology, no explanation, just acknowledgement. I placed the frame on the mantel beside Carl's old pocket watch. Then I turned off the lights and let the sunset fill the room. Orange, red, fading to a calm violet. For the first time in my 71 years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to happen. I realized it already had. Maybe life isn't about the people who stay or the ones who leave. Maybe it's about who we become when everything breaks, and we have to choose whether to rebuild or remain ruins. And sometimes, The bravest thing you can do is simply keep loving, even when love no longer needs an audience. As the screen fades to black, you hear the faint sound of rain, not heavy, just enough to remind you that even after the storm, the earth still breathes. I didn't expect peace to arrive so quietly. It didn't come with fireworks or forgiveness. It came in the way sunlight touched the curtains one morning, in the way I no longer flinched when the phone rang. Maybe that's what healing really is. Not a grand victory, not a cinematic ending, just the return of ordinary moments that no longer hurt. Yesterday, I found one of Emily's old texts still saved in my phone. I had never deleted it. It was short. "We'll pay you back soon, I promise." I smiled at it. Not bitterly, just softly. I think some part of me once believed that money could keep love alive. Now I know. Love that needs to be purchased is already bankrupt. I deleted the message. The sound of that tiny click felt like closing a door that had been left open too long. I've started writing letters again. Not to Daniel, not to Emily, but to strangers. Letters for the lonely, the widowed, the forgotten. I leave them in library books, park benches, and sometimes between the pages of donated novels. Each one begins the same way. If no one has told you lately, you matter. Maybe that's my rebellion now. Not against my son, or society, or age, but against indifference. Against the silence that used to consume me. Some evenings, I still talk to Carl, not through prayer, just conversation. I tell him about the neighbor's cat that keeps visiting, about the lady at the market who gives me extra apples. "Because you remind me of my mother." He doesn't answer, but sometimes I feel his presence. In the small pauses, in the way my heart steadies before sleep. I think that's what love becomes after death. Not a person, but a rhythm. A quiet music that keeps us alive even when we think we've stopped dancing. A few days ago I saw Daniel again, by accident, at the pharmacy. He looked older, thinner, but gentler somehow. He didn't see me at first, then he did. For a moment, our eyes met. And in that silence, I saw all the things we could never say. He nodded once. I nodded back, and that was enough. I walked home slowly, feeling the evening air move around me. Calm, forgiving, infinite. At the door, I looked up at the sky. It was the same color as the lake from my dream. And I whispered, almost without realizing, "Thank you, life, for not giving me what I wanted, but giving me what I needed." Sometimes peace doesn't mean everything is fixed. It just means you've stopped bleeding.